We're told that kindness is its own reward, that mercy shown to the helpless will somehow circle back as blessing. Fairy tales promise that saving a wounded creature in the forest will earn you magic, gratitude, transformation. But when you're the lowest of the low, when your own pack has labeled you defective and disposable, you learn the devastating truth. Mercy is a luxury you cannot afford, and the things you save will devour you anyway. I learned this the night I dragged a dying wolf across my threshold. They call us Omegas. Bottom of the hierarchy. In a world where werewolves rule and shifting is as natural as breathing, I am the anomaly, the glitch in the system. 23 years old, and I've never felt my bones crack and reform. Never felt fur replace skin. Never known the freedom of 4 legs instead of 2. But that's not the worst of my failures. The worst is written in the pitying glances of the pack healers, in the way my own mother can't meet my eyes anymore, in the medical file that uses words like barren, and infertile, and genetic dead end. In a society built on bloodlines and breeding, I am worthless. A womb that will never quicken. A wolf that will never run. My mate figured it out 3 months after our bonding ceremony. Theron didn't even have the decency to reject me privately. He announced it at the pack gathering, his hand already resting possessively on my sister Vera's shoulder. The bond was a mistake, he'd said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. I cannot waste my prime years on a female who cannot give me heirs. The pack alpha, my own father, had nodded slowly. Approving. Practical. Vera had looked at me with something between pity and triumph. I'd packed my things that night and walked into the forest. No one stopped me. No one even said goodbye. That was 8 months ago. Now I live in this forgotten cabin, on the border of our territory, and the unclaimed wild lands. I chop wood. I tend a garden. I read the books that travelers occasionally trade for my medicinal herbs, and I tell myself stories, beautiful lies about girls who become heroes, about monsters who become princes, about belonging somewhere that isn't here. The stories are all I have left. So when I found the wolf bleeding out in the snow 50 yards from my door, I should have walked away, should have let nature take its course, should have protected the one thing I'd managed to salvage from the wreckage of my life, my solitude. Instead, I made a choice that would destroy everything. I saved him. Chapter 1. The Wounded Beast. The wolf was massive, easily twice the size of any pack wolf I'd ever seen. His fur was midnight black, so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Blood matted his coat, spreading from a wound in his side that looked like claw marks, 4 deep gouges that had torn through muscle down to bone. He was dying. Even I could see that. And I was no healer. His eyes found mine in the darkness, not yellow like wolf eyes should be. Gold. Pure, molten gold that held an intelligence no animal should possess. He didn't growl or snap, didn't try to drag himself away. He just watched me with those impossible eyes, and I saw something in them that made my chest constrict. Recognition, not of me specifically, but of what I was, what we both were, broken things, bleeding out in the cold. This is stupid, I whispered to myself, even as I knelt beside him. This is how people die in cautionary tales. The wolf made a sound, not quite a whimper, but close. His breathing was shallow, labored. Each exhale produced a fine mist in the freezing air. I'd dragged deer carcasses before. This couldn't be much different. It was much, much different. He must have weighed close to 200 pounds, and dead weight was harder to move than I'd anticipated. By the time I'd hauled him across the threshold of my cabin, my muscles were screaming and sweat had soaked through my thermal layers despite the winter cold. The wolf didn't resist. Didn't help either. He just endured, those gold eyes tracking my every movement. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, panting. The fire in my hearth had burned down to coals, casting everything in an orange-red glow. The wolf lay on my floor, bleeding onto the rough wooden planks I'd scrubbed clean just this morning. Right, I said to the empty room. To myself. To him. First rule of saving mysterious dying wolves. Don't let them bleed out on your floor. I'd learned basic wound care from necessity. When you lived alone in the forest, injuries were inevitable. I had supplies, needle and thread, alcohol, clean cloth, herbs that could fight infection or dull pain. What I didn't have was any idea how to treat a wolf this size without getting my throat torn out. "I'm going to help you," I said clearly, moving slowly into his line of sight. "I need to clean the wound. It's going to hurt. If you're going to bite me, just make it quick. I'd rather not suffer." The wolf blinked once. Slowly, almost like acknowledgement, I gathered my supplies and knelt beside him, my hands trembling only slightly. The wound was worse up close. Whatever had attacked him had been trying to kill him. The gouges were too precise, too deliberately placed. This wasn't a territorial dispute or a hunting accident. This was an execution attempt. I poured alcohol over the wound. The wolf's entire body went rigid. A low, agonized sound rumbled from his chest, not quite a howl, too controlled for that. His eyes squeezed shut, and for a moment I thought he might snap after all. But he stayed still, every muscle locked with effort. "I know," I whispered, surprised by the gentleness in my own voice. "I know it hurts." I worked quickly, cleaning away blood and debris, packing the wound with a poultice made from yarrow and comfrey. The deepest parts would need stitches, but that would have to wait until I was sure he wouldn't bleed out from the initial trauma. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, but my mind wandered to dangerous places. Who was this wolf? Why was he alone? Why had someone tried to kill him? And why did looking into his eyes feel like looking into a mirror? "There," I said finally, sitting back on my heels. "That's all I can do for now. The rest is up to you." The wolf's breathing had steadied slightly. His eyes opened again, fixing on me with that unnerving intensity. "You're welcome," I added, suddenly self-conscious. I don't get many guests, obviously, so forgive me if my bedside manner is lacking." I stood and moved to stoke the fire, adding logs until the flames leaped high and bright. The cabin warmed quickly. It was a small space, one room with my bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs I'd built myself, shelves lined with books and dried herbs. Simple, solitary, safe. Or it had been, until tonight. I pulled a blanket from my bed and spread it over the wolf, careful not to disturb the wound. He watched every movement, never looking away. "I'm going to sleep now," I announced, suddenly exhausted. "You should too. Healing requires rest." I climbed into my bed fully clothed, too tired and too wary to undress. My knife stayed under my pillow, just in case. The last thing I saw before sleep claimed me was those gold eyes, still watching, still aware, still impossibly, devastatingly intelligent. I woke to silence. Not the normal forest silence I'd grown accustomed to, the whisper of wind through pines, the distant call of night birds, the creak of settling wood. This was different, heavier, the silence of held breath, the silence of being watched. Dawn light filtered through my single window, pale and gray. The fire had burned down to nothing, and my floor, where a dying wolf had lain just hours before, was empty. No blood, no blanket, no evidence that any of it had happened at all. Except, I sat up slowly, my heart beginning to pound, except for the man standing in the corner of my cabin. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that seemed too broad for the small space. He wore black traveling clothes that looked expensive, tailored leather and fine wool that marked him as someone important, someone who didn't belong in places like this. His hair was black as midnight, falling just past his shoulders. His face was all sharp angles and harsh beauty, the kind of face that belonged on ancient statues, carved from marble by artists, trying to capture something divine and terrible. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Gold, molten gold, the exact same shade as the wolf's. "You," I breathed. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was somehow both polite and mocking. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "You saved my life, Omega." It wasn't a question, wasn't even really a statement of gratitude. It was an observation, delivered with the cool detachment of someone cataloging facts. I should have been terrified, should have been scrambling for my knife, screaming, running. But instead, I found myself fascinated by the wrongness of him. The way he stood too still, like he'd forgotten how humans moved. The way his eyes tracked my every breath, predatory and precise. Who are you? I managed. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth at all. I, he said softly, am the Alpha King. And you, little Omega, have just made a very dangerous mistake. Chapter 2. The Transaction. The Alpha King. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone knew about the Alpha King. He ruled the 5 territories from a castle in the north, a fortress built into the mountains that no one entered without invitation. He was a legend. A nightmare. The wolf who'd united the packs through a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless violence. They said he'd killed his own father to take the throne. They said he could shift faster than thought, that his wolf form was unstoppable in battle. They said he had no mate, no heir, no weakness. And he was standing in my cabin, looking at me like I was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. You're not going to scream? He asked, tilting his head slightly. The gesture was distinctly wolf-like, curious, predatory. Would it help? My voice came out steadier than I expected. No, then I'll save my energy. Something flickered in those gold eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or approval. It vanished too quickly to be sure. He moved then, not toward me, but to the window. He stood there looking out at the forest, his back to me. It should have been a vulnerable position. Instead, it felt like a test. Like he was daring me to try something. I stayed exactly where I was. Your wound, I said finally. You should be resting. That kind of damage is already healing. He turned back to face me. We heal faster than you do, Omega. One of many advantages of being able to shift. The casual cruelty of that statement landed like a slap. He knew what I was. What I couldn't do. Why are you here? I asked, lifting my chin. If he was going to mock me, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. You saved my life, he repeated. That creates a debt. I don't want anything from you. No? He moved closer, each step deliberate. You don't want your shifting ability restored? Your fertility healed? Your mate bond with that pathetic beta severed properly? I felt the blood drain from my face. How do you? I know everything about my territories, little Omega, including which packs are weak enough to cast out their own daughters. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell him now, pine and snow and something darker, like smoke from a funeral pyre. Your father is Alpha of the Eastern Border Pack, small, struggling. He offered your sister to a stronger Pax Beta to secure an alliance. When that Beta chose you instead, your father was disappointed. Stop. And when you proved to be barren. Stop. The word came out louder than I intended. My hands were shaking. I don't need you to recite my failures. I'm aware of them. Silence fell between us, heavy and sharp. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Really smiled this time, not that cold curve from before. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost human. Good, he said softly. I was beginning to think you were too broken to have any fire left. I stared at him. Is that what you came here for? To see if I'd fight back? I came here, he said, moving to my small table and sitting in one of my hand-built chairs like he owned it. Because you made a choice last night. You saw something dying, and you saved it, despite having every reason not to, despite the danger, despite the cost. There wasn't any cost. His smile faded. Wasn't there? I could smell them, you know. The wolves who came sniffing around your cabin at dawn. 3 of them, young males from your former pack, sent to check on you, to make sure you're still alone, still weak, still not a threat. My blood went cold. I hadn't heard anyone, hadn't sensed anything. They saw my tracks, he continued, large wolf prints, male, leading right to your door, and they left very, very quickly. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. By now, your father knows you had a male visitor. In a few hours, he'll come to investigate, and when he finds out who that visitor was, understanding crashed over me like ice water. You've destroyed my peace, I whispered. I've destroyed your isolation, he corrected. There's a difference. Peace was always an illusion, Omega. Your pack was never going to let you disappear. Exiles can become martyrs. Martyrs become rallying points for dissent. Your father needed you alive but irrelevant. Now you're neither. I sank onto my bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm about to make you an offer, and I want you to understand exactly what you're choosing between. He stood, moving to tower over me. Not threatening, exactly, but undeniably dominant. Your father will come today. He'll drag you back to the pack, and this time he won't let you leave. You'll be married off to whatever male will take damaged goods, probably someone old, or cruel, or desperate enough not to care that you can't give him children. You'll spend the rest of your life as someone's property. A cautionary tale told to young wolves about the price of defiance. Or, the word came out barely audible. Or, he said, crouching down so we were eye level. You come with me. Now, today, you leave this cabin and everything in it behind, and you enter into my service. As what? A servant? As my problem solver. His gold eyes held mine, unflinching. I have a situation. A curse, if you want to use dramatic language. I need someone intelligent, someone observant. Someone who can see beyond surface appearances because they've been forced to live beneath them. What kind of curse? The kind I can't explain until you agree to come. He stood abruptly, moving back toward the window. Your father will be here in less than an hour. I can smell his wolves already mobilizing. So the see they quickly, Omega. A lifetime of serving someone who sees you as worthless, or a year of serving someone who sees you as useful. Either way, you're not staying here. The casual dismissal of my entire life should have enraged me. Instead, I found myself thinking about the wolf from last night, the way he'd looked at me with those gold eyes, recognizing something in me that mirrored his own brokenness. If I come with you, I said slowly, what happens after a year? If you solve my problem, I give you whatever you want. Land, money, a new identity in a different territory. Freedom, truly this time. He glanced back at me. If you fail, well, at least you'll have had a year away from here. And if I refuse, then I leave now, and you face your father alone. I won't interfere, won't protect you, won't acknowledge that we ever met. His expression was unreadable. You saved my life, Omega, but I didn't ask you to. The debt is yours to claim or forfeit. Outside, I heard them. Footsteps crunching through snow. Multiple sets. Male voices calling out, getting closer. My father's voice, sharp with authority. Daughter, come out where we can see you. I looked at the Alpha King, this stranger who'd crashed into my life as a dying wolf and emerged as something infinitely more dangerous. Everything about this was wrong. Reckless. Potentially fatal, but staying was certain death. Slow, suffocating death of the spirit. I have one condition, I said. His eyebrow rose. Bold. You said I saved your life, that you owe a debt. I stood, meeting his eyes without flinching. Then answer me honestly. Last night, when you were bleeding on my floor, you could have shifted back to human form, could have healed faster, spoken to me, explained who you were. Why didn't you? For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then his mouth curved into that almost smile again. Because, he said softly, I wanted to see what you'd do, if you'd show mercy to a monster when there was nothing in it for you. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. You did, which means you're either exceptionally kind or exceptionally stupid. I haven't decided which yet. The pounding on my door grew louder. My father's voice. Open this door. Now. The Alpha King looked at me expectantly. Waiting. I grabbed my warmest cloak, the knife from under my pillow, and the single book on my shelf that had been my mother's before she stopped looking at me. Everything else, the cabin, the garden, the life I'd built from scraps I left behind. Let's go, I said. He opened the door just as my father raised his fist to pound again. The Alpha of the Eastern Border Pack froze. Behind him, 5 of his strongest wolves went absolutely still, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Alpha Marcus, the king said pleasantly. How good of you to see me off. I'll be borrowing your daughter. Indefinitely. My father's face went from red to white. Your Majesty, There must be some mistake. No mistake. She saved my life. Therefore, she's mine now. I'm sure you understand." The king's voice was light, almost friendly. But there was steel underneath. "Unless you'd like to challenge my claim?" No one moved. No one breathed. The king smiled, then sharp and cold, and absolutely final. "Excellent. Come, Omega. We have a long journey ahead." He shifted in an instant. One moment, a man. The next, that massive black wolf from last night, completely healed and terrifyingly powerful. He looked back at me expectantly. I'd never ridden a wolf before, had never even been offered the chance. But I climbed onto his back, gripping the thick fur at his shoulders, and felt his muscles bunch beneath me. The last thing I saw before we disappeared into the forest was my father's face, pale with fear, but also twisted with relief. He'd wanted me gone. Now I was. Just not in the way any of us had expected. Chapter 3. The Castle of Contradictions. The journey took 3 days. The Alpha King, I still didn't know his actual name, and he hadn't offered it, moved through the forest like shadow given form. We traveled mostly at night, stopping only when exhaustion forced me to sleep. He never shifted back to human form during those stops, just curled his massive body around me in a protective circle, keeping me warm while those gold eyes stayed alert, watching the darkness. I should have been terrified. Should have spent every moment planning escape. Instead, I found myself studying him. The way he moved with fluid grace that made other wolves look clumsy. The way he'd pause sometimes, ears swiveling to catch sounds I couldn't hear. The way he'd slow his pace when I needed rest but would never actually stop unless I asked. He was considerate, careful, nothing like the monster from the stories, which somehow made him more frightening, not less. On the 3rd night, we crested a ridge, and I saw it, the castle. It rose from the mountainside, like it had grown there, all dark stone, and sharp towers that pierced the low clouds. Moonlight turned its walls to silver. Beautiful and cold. Torches blazed along the ramparts, revealing guards posted at regular intervals. "It's magnificent," I whispered. The king made a sound almost like a scoff. Then he started down the mountain path toward the main gates. The guards saw us coming and immediately dropped to one knee, fists over hearts. The massive iron gates swung open without anyone touching them. Magic. Then, old magic, woven into the very stones. We crossed through a courtyard, where more guards and servants knelt as we passed. All of them kept their eyes lowered. None dared to look directly at their king, or at me, the strange Omega, riding on his back like I had any right to be there. The king carried me through an arched entrance into a grand hall that took my breath away. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness, columns that soared up to vaulted ceilings painted with constellations, tapestries depicting battles and coronations, and great wolves running beneath star-filled skies. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. The king shifted mid-stride, the transformation so smooth I barely registered it happening. One moment I was on his back, the next I was stumbling as human hands caught me, steadying me before I could fall. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space, "to your new prison." Before I could respond, a door opened and a woman emerged. She was older, maybe 50, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her dress was simple but elegant, dark blue with silver embroidery. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime managing chaos. "Your Majesty." She dipped into a perfect curtsy, her eyes flicking to me with barely concealed curiosity. "We received your raven. The chambers are prepared." "Thank you, Meredith." The king released me, stepping back. "This is... Actually, I never asked your name." Heat flooded my cheeks. 3 days together and we hadn't even exchanged names. "Isla," I said quietly. "My name is Isla." "Isla." He tested it, nodding once. "Meredith is my head housekeeper. She'll show you to your rooms and provide anything you need. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we talk." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Isla? Don't try to leave. The castle is warded. You'd be dead before you reach the tree line." Then he was gone, disappearing through a doorway that led deeper into the castle. Meredith watched him go with an expression I couldn't read. Then she turned to me, and her severe face softened slightly. "Come, child. You look exhausted." 1. My rooms were nothing like I'd expected. I'd prepared myself for a cell, a servant's quarters at best. Instead, Meredith led me up a spiraling staircase to the 3rd floor, and opened a door onto a suite that was larger than my entire cabin. The main room had a sitting area with plush chairs arranged before a fireplace that was already crackling with warmth. Bookshelves lined one wall empty, but waiting. A door led to a bedroom with a massive bed piled high with furs and blankets. Another door revealed a bathing room with a copper tub large enough to swim in. "This is a mistake," I said. "I'm just an Omega. I don't need." "You're the king's guest," Meredith interrupted firmly. "And in this castle, the king's word is law." She moved to a wardrobe and opened it, revealing dresses in rich fabrics, wool and velvet and silk in deep jewel tones. "These should fit well enough until we can have some made specifically for you." I touched one of the dresses, emerald green with delicate embroidery along the sleeves. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever owned. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would he?" "Because you saved his life." Meredith's voice was gentle now. "And because he needs you. More than you know." She moved to the door, then paused. "A word of advice, Isla. The king seems harsh, but he's fair. Serve him honestly, and you'll find he's the best master you could hope for." Her expression darkened. "But don't mistake his courtesy for weakness, and never, ever try to manipulate him. He's been betrayed too many times to tolerate it again." Then she was gone, leaving me alone in these impossible rooms with questions multiplying in my mind. I should have been exhausted, should have collapsed into that massive bed and slept for days. Instead, I found myself drawn to the windows. They overlooked the courtyard and beyond it, the forest stretching dark and endless toward mountains I couldn't see. The moon was full tonight, painting everything in silver and shadow. I pressed my palm against the cold glass and wondered what I'd gotten myself into. I didn't sleep. How could I? Everything about this was wrong. Kings didn't bring Omegas to their castles, didn't give them rooms fit for nobility, didn't look at them like they were puzzles waiting to be solved instead of broken things to be discarded. As dawn broke, I gave up on rest and bathed instead. The hot water was a luxury I hadn't known I'd missed, and there were soaps that smelled like lavender and mint. I scrubbed away 3 days of travel, dressed in the simplest dress I could find, a deep gray wool that was still finer than anything I'd owned before, and waited. The knock came just as the sun cleared the mountains. "Enter," I called, expecting Meredith. Instead, the king stepped through my door. He'd changed clothes, black pants, and a loose white shirt that made him look less like a monarch and more like a man. His hair was still damp from his own bath, curling slightly at the ends. He looked younger in the morning light, tired, almost vulnerable. "Walk with me," he said. Not a question. Never a question with him. I followed him down corridors I'd never navigate on my own, past guards who snapped to attention as we passed. We descended stairs that spiraled down, 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 into the depths of the castle, until the air grew cold and the torches on the walls burned with blue-tinted flames. Magic. Strong magic, humming in the stones themselves. Finally, we stopped before a door. It was different from the others, made of black wood bound with silver, covered in runes that hurt to look at directly. "What you're about to see," the king said quietly, "cannot be shared with anyone. Ever. Do you understand?" "Yes." He studied my face, searching for something. Then he opened the door. The room beyond was circular, carved from solid rock. More runes covered every surface, walls, floor, ceiling. In the center stood a mirror, not a normal mirror, but something ancient and wrong, its surface swirling with colors that didn't exist in nature. And reflected in that mirror, I gasped. There were 3 figures in the reflection, all standing where the king stood. The first was the man beside me, tall, beautiful, powerful. The second was the wolf I'd saved, massive, black-furred, magnificent. The third was a monster. It stood on 2 legs like a man, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its body was covered in black scales that gleamed like oil. Its hands ended in claws as long as daggers. Its face was elongated, almost dragon-like, with eyes that glowed the same molten gold as the others. All 3 figures moved when the king moved. All 3 were him. "I am cursed," the king said, his voice echoing strangely in the circular room, "to exist as 3 beings instead of 1. Man, wolf, beast." He gestured to the monstrous reflection. "That is what lives inside me. What I become when the moon is dark. What I have to lock myself away to prevent from destroying everything I've built." I couldn't look away from the monster. It was terrifying, yes, but also sad. The way it held itself, the expression in those gold eyes, it looked as lonely as I felt. "The curse was cast by my father before I killed him," the king continued. "He wanted to ensure I'd never be whole, never be worthy of the throne. And he succeeded. I rule by day as a man, hunt by night as a wolf, but 3 nights each month I become that. Mindless, violent, barely contained by the wards in this room." He turned to face me fully. "I've consulted every witch, every mage, every ancient text in 5 territories. The curse can only be broken one way. Someone must love all 3 forms equally, must see the man, the wolf, and the beast as one being worthy of devotion." Understanding crashed over me. "You want me to—" "No," he cut me off sharply. "I don't want anything from you, but I need you to observe, to study, to tell me if it's even possible for someone to love a monster." His jaw tightened. "I have 3 more years, before the curse becomes permanent, before the beast takes over completely, and I lose myself forever. I need to know if I should keep searching for a solution, or if I should just let it happen." Kamal, I looked at the 3 reflections again. Man, wolf, beast. All of them watching me with those same gold eyes. "You're asking me to decide if you're worthy of love," I said slowly. "I'm asking you to tell me the truth." He stepped closer to the mirror, his reflections moving with him. "Everyone else tells me what I want to hear. They fear me too much to be honest. But you?" He glanced back at me. "You have nothing to lose. No mate, no pack, no future to protect. You can afford to be honest." The casual cruelty of that statement should have hurt. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Understanding. He wasn't trying to wound me. He was simply stating facts, and he was right. I had nothing left to lose. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Spend time with all 3 forms. Get to know each one. Ask questions. Observe." He moved away from the mirror, the door opening at his approach. "And in 1 year, tell me what you've learned. Tell me if the curse can be broken, or if I should stop fighting it." We climbed back up in silence. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd seen. When we reached my chambers, he paused. "You're free to move throughout the castle. The library is on the 2nd floor. I think you'll like it. Take meals in your rooms or the main hall, whatever you prefer. The only places forbidden to you are the North Tower and the room you just saw." "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question escaped before I could stop it. He tilted his head, studying me. "Because you saved my life when you had no reason to. Because you see broken things and try to fix them instead of walking away." His expression softened slightly. "And because I think you understand what it's like to be treated as less than you are, to be judged for circumstances beyond your control." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with impossible questions and a task that felt more like a riddle than a mission. How do you measure love? How do you determine if a monster is worthy of devotion? And how do you stay objective when you're starting to suspect the most monstrous thing in this castle might be the loneliness that haunts its king? Subscribe if you've ever felt like Isla broken, cast aside, but still hoping someone might see your worth. Because stories like this remind us that being damaged doesn't make us unlovable. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter of their journey. Chapter 4. The Library and the Wolf. I spent the first 3 days exploring the castle like a ghost haunting rooms I had no right to occupy. The place was massive, far larger than it appeared from outside. Corridors branched into more corridors, staircases led to towers and dungeons, and every corner held something beautiful or strange or both. Tapestries that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Suits of armor that tracked my passage with empty helmets. gardens enclosed in glass where flowers bloomed despite the winter cold outside. But it was the library that captured me completely. Meredith hadn't lied, it was on the second floor, behind double doors carved with images of wolves running through forests of stars. When I pushed them open, I actually gasped. The room was 3 stories tall, with shelves climbing toward a domed ceiling painted to look like the night sky. Ladders on rails allowed access to higher levels, and there were reading nooks tucked into alcoves, each with cushioned seats and perfect lighting from enchanted globes that needed no fire or oil. There were thousands of books, tens of thousands maybe. More books than I'd known existed in the entire world. I stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer impossible abundance of it. "Do you read, Omega?" I spun around to find the king standing behind me. He moved silently for such a large man. Predator's grace, even in human form. "Yes," I said, then caught myself. "I mean, when I can." I had a few books. In my cabin. Had? I left them. The admission hurt more than I expected. I only brought one. My mother's. Something flickered across his face too quick to name. Which one? A collection of fairy tales. Old ones, from before the territories were established. Stories about humans and wolves living separately. Ah. He moved past me into the library, his fingers trailing along the spines of books as he walked. Myths and legends. I have an entire section devoted to them. 3rd floor, eastern wall. He glanced back at me. "You're welcome to read anything you like. Stay as long as you want. This room is open to you." "Why?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Why give me all of this? The rooms, the clothes, the library. I'm supposed to be observing you, not living like nobility. He was quiet for a long moment, still facing away from me. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "When I was young, my father kept me locked in the dungeons, days at a time, sometimes weeks. He said it would teach me strength, discipline, how to endure." His hand pressed flat against the bookshelf. There was nothing in those cells, no light, no comfort, no books, nothing but stone and darkness, and my own thoughts, eating me alive. I felt something twist in my chest. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It did teach me something." He turned to face me, and his gold eyes held an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "It taught me that cruelty for its own sake is weakness. That breaking someone doesn't make you strong, it just makes you a bully with power you don't deserve." He gestured around the library. "You're here to help me, Isla. The least I can do is make sure you don't suffer in the process." Before I could respond, he was moving toward the door. "I'll be in wolf form tonight, hunting in the forest. If you'd like to join me, meet me in the courtyard at sunset." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with thousands of books and the echo of unexpected vulnerability. I spent the afternoon in the library, pulling books at random and devouring their contents. History texts about the formation of the territories, botanical guides with illustrations of plants I'd never seen, poetry that made my chest ache with its beauty, and yes, fairy tales, dozens of them. Stories about transformation and curses and true love's kiss-breaking spells that seemed impossible to break. They all ended the same way. Happily ever after. I wondered if the king had read them. If he'd hoped they held some secret to breaking his curse. If he'd been disappointed to learn they were just stories. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I made my way to the courtyard. The king was already there, still in human form, watching the horizon with an expression I couldn't read. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "You invited me." "You invited me. Invitations can be refused, not when I'm trying to understand you." I moved to stand beside him, following his gaze to the darkening forest. "You said I needed to observe all 3 forms. I can't do that from the library." His mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "Fair point." The transformation happened as the sun touched the mountains. One moment, a man stood beside me. The next, the massive black wolf, his gold eyes glowing in the gathering dusk. He was even more magnificent than I remembered. The wound that had nearly killed him was completely healed. not even a scar visible through his thick fur. He lowered himself slightly, looking at me expectantly. "You want me to ride?" I asked. "Like before?" A huff that might have been affirmation. I climbed onto his back, gripping his fur, and felt his muscles bunch beneath me. Then we were moving not the desperate flight from my father's pack, but something else. Something like joy. He ran through the forest with powerful, loping strides that ate up distance. Trees blurred past. The wind whipped my hair back and stung my cheeks. I should have been terrified, clinging on for dear life. Instead, I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sheer exhilaration of movement, of speed, of being part of something wild and free, it was intoxicating. For the first time in my life, I understood what I'd been missing. What it must feel like to shift, to run on 4 legs, to be connected to the wolf inside. The wolf slowed slightly, and I felt a rumble through his chest that might have been laughter. We ran for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than one. He showed me parts of the forest I'd never seen. A waterfall that cascaded down black rocks, a clearing where deer grazed in the moonlight, a circle of standing stones that hummed with old magic. Finally, we stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley. The castle was visible in the distance, its towers lit with torchlight. Beyond it, the territories stretched out in a patchwork of forest and mountain, all silvered by moonlight. It was beautiful. Heartbreakingly beautiful. I slid off the wolf's back and moved to the cliff's edge, being careful to stay well back from the drop. The wolf settled beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth. "Thank you," I said softly, "for showing me this." He made a sound not quite a whine, but something close, questioning. "I've never felt like that before," I explained. "Free, powerful, like I belonged somewhere, even if just for a moment." I looked at him, those gold eyes watching me intently. "Is that what it's always like for you, when you shift?" A pause, then a slow nod. "It must be hard," I continued, speaking more to myself than to him. "To have that freedom, that power, but to know that part of you, the beast, is something you have to lock away. To know that the very thing that makes you strong is also the thing that could destroy everything." The wolf's ears flattened slightly, not in anger, but something else. Sadness, maybe. I reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, I rested my hand on his massive head, fingers sinking into thick fur. "I don't think you're a monster," I whispered. "I think you're someone who's been hurt so badly that you can't tell the difference between strength and survival anymore." The wolf went very still. Then, slowly, carefully, he pressed his head more firmly into my hand. Not demanding, but accepting. Allowing the touch. We stayed like that for a long time, watching the moon rise higher and the stars emerge one by one. No words, no expectations. Just quiet companionship. For the first time since being cast out of my pack, I didn't feel alone. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Mornings, I spent in the library, reading everything I could find about curses and transformation magic. Most of it was theoretical ancient texts written by scholars who'd never actually encountered such things. But there were common threads. Curses required specific conditions to break, usually involving genuine emotion or sacrifice. True love was mentioned frequently, but always in vague, unhelpful ways. Afternoons, the king would find me, sometimes in the library, sometimes in the gardens, occasionally in my chambers. We'd talk about books, about the territories, about nothing in particular. He was surprisingly easy to talk to when he wasn't trying to be intimidating, sharp-witted and well-read, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. I learned that he'd taken the throne at 19, after killing his father in single combat, when the old king's cruelty had finally pushed the Pax to the brink of civil war, that he'd spent 5 years stabilizing the territories through a combination of strategic alliances and carefully applied force, that he was 27 now, which meant he'd been cursed for 8 years, that he was tired, so desperately tired of fighting. Evenings, he'd shift, and we'd run through the forest together. He never tried to communicate beyond simple gestures in wolf form, never tried to shift back to explain or discuss. It was like those hours were sacred somehow, a time when he could just be, without the weight of the crown or the curse. I started to look forward to those runs more than anything else. But the dark moon was approaching. The night when he'd become the beast. 3 days before, he stopped visiting. I didn't see him in the library, didn't find him in the gardens. When I asked Meredith, she just gave me a sympathetic look and said, "He always withdraws before the transformation, child. It's difficult for him." On the night of the dark moon, I stood at my window watching the courtyard. Just after midnight, I saw him, the man, walking alone toward the door that led to the dungeons. His shoulders were hunched, his steps slow. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. I should have stayed in my room. Should have respected his privacy, his obvious desire to face this alone. Instead, I grabbed my cloak and followed. The guards didn't stop me. Either they'd been told to let me pass, or they simply didn't care what one powerless Omega did. I descended the spiral stairs, following the path we'd taken that first day, until I reached the black door covered in silver runes. It was closed, locked, but I could hear something from the other side. Breathing, heavy, labored breathing that sounded wrong, too deep, too slow, too much like a growl building in a throat that wasn't meant for it. Then, a voice. His voice, but strained, desperate. "Not yet. Please. Not yet. I need more time." A crash. The sound of claws scraping stone, and then a roar that shook the very walls, so full of rage and pain and loneliness that my eyes burned with tears. I pressed my palm against the door, feeling the hum of the wards beneath my skin. "I'm here," I whispered, knowing he couldn't possibly hear me through the door and the magic. "You're not alone. I'm here." The roaring stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy and waiting. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. A sound like claws scraping gently against the other side of the door, not trying to break through, just acknowledging. I stayed there all night, my hand pressed against the black wood, keeping vigil for a monster who thought no one cared if he suffered. When dawn came and the wards finally quieted, the door opened. The king stood there in human form, naked and covered in sweat and small cuts where he'd obviously fought against his restraints. His gold eyes were haunted, exhausted beyond measure. He stared at me like he couldn't quite believe I was real. "You stayed," he said hoarsely. "Yes. Why?" I thought about all the complicated reasons, about observation and curses and the task he'd given me, about loneliness, recognizing loneliness, about how it felt to be cast aside and forgotten. But what I said was simpler, truer, because no one should have to suffer alone. Something broke in his expression, his shoulders sagged, and for a moment I thought he might actually collapse. Instead, he just nodded once, sharply, and moved past me toward the stairs. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for bearing witness." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the corridor with the scent of blood and magic and the growing, terrifying realization that I was starting to care about this broken king far more than was wise. Chapter 5. The Question and the Library. The king avoided me for 3 days after the dark moon. I saw him only in passing, a glimpse of black hair disappearing around a corner, a shadow moving through the courtyard at dawn, the sound of his voice giving orders to guards from rooms I couldn't enter. He was everywhere and nowhere, present in the castle but unreachable. It shouldn't have hurt. We barely knew each other. I was here to observe, to analyze, to provide an objective assessment of whether his curse could be broken, nothing more. But it did hurt, because I'd stayed outside that door all night, and he'd thanked me, and then he'd disappeared, like my presence had been an embarrassment rather than a comfort. On the 4th day, I found a note slipped under my door. "The library, midnight, please." No signature, no explanation. Just those 4 words in bold, angular handwriting. I should have been annoyed at the presumption, should have refused out of principle. Instead, I counted the hours until darkness fell. The library was different at night. The enchanted globes had dimmed to a soft glow that made the massive space feel intimate rather than overwhelming. Shadows pooled in the corners and between the shelves, and the painted night sky on the ceiling seemed more real somehow, like the dome had opened to reveal actual stars. The king stood by one of the reading nooks on the 2nd level, his back to me. He'd heard me enter, I knew he had, with his enhanced senses, but he didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for disappearing." I climbed the spiral stairs to the second level, my footsteps loud in the silence. "You don't owe me an explanation." "Yes, I do." He finally turned to face me, and I was struck by how tired he looked. Not physically, he'd obviously bathed and rested, but emotionally, like something inside him had been worn down to nothing. "You stayed with me through the transformation. You kept vigil when you had no obligation to. And I repaid that kindness by running away like a coward." "You weren't running away, wasn't I?" His mouth twisted into something bitter. "I couldn't face you, Isla. Couldn't stand the thought of seeing pity in your eyes, or worse, fear, because that's what I am when the moon goes dark. Something to be pitied or feared, something that needs to be locked away for everyone's safety." I moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "Is that what you think I felt? Pity, didn't you?" "No." I stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes. "I felt sad. Angry. Even. That you have to go through that alone, month after month, with no one to help you, that your father cursed you to suffer in isolation." I met his gaze steadily. "But I didn't pity you. Pity is what you give to something weak and helpless. You're neither of those things." He stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "You heard me in there, heard the beast. How can you stand here and tell me I'm not something to be feared? Because fear and respect aren't the same thing," I said simply. "I respect your power. I respect the control it must take to contain something that strong. But I'm not afraid of you. You should be. Maybe." I shrugged. "But I've been afraid my whole life. Afraid of not being enough. Of disappointing people. Of taking up space I didn't deserve. I'm tired of being afraid, especially of someone who's never given me a reason to be." The silence stretched between us, heavy with things neither of us knew how to say. Finally, he gestured to the reading nook behind him. "Will you sit with me? I have something I want to show you." The nook was one of the larger ones, with a cushioned bench seat wide enough for two and a small table already laden with books. He'd prepared this, I realized, had planned this conversation. I sat, tucking my legs under me, and watched as he settled across from me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've been researching," he said, pulling one of the books toward him. "Every text I can find about curses like mine, and I found something interesting." He opened the book to a marked page, turning it so I could see. "This is a record from 300 years ago. A wolf who was cursed to become something monstrous during the dark moon. Sound familiar?" I leaned forward, scanning the old text. The language was archaic, difficult to parse, but the story was clear enough. A wolf lord, cursed by a rival, transformed into a beast that killed indiscriminately. The curse was eventually broken, but it doesn't say how, I murmured, frowning at the page. "It just says the curse was lifted when the Lord found that which he most desired." "Exactly." The king pulled another book forward, then another, flipping to marked pages. "Every account I've found is the same. Vague promises about true love or pure hearts or noble sacrifice, but never any concrete details about what actually breaks the curse." I looked at the stack of books, at least a dozen, all marked with scraps of paper. "How long have you been searching?" 8 years. Since the night my father died, and I felt the curse take hold." His jaw tightened. "I've consulted witches, mages, seers, paid fortunes for prophecies that told me nothing useful, traveled to ancient sites of power hoping for answers." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you know what I learned?" "What?" "That curses are designed to be unbreakable. Not because they can't be broken, but because the conditions are so specific, so unique to each individual, that finding the solution is nearly impossible." He closed the book in front of him with more force than necessary. My father knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't just curse me to suffer, he cursed me to hope. To spend years searching for an answer that might not even exist. The defeat in his voice made my chest ache. "So why did you bring me here, if you've already decided it's hopeless?" "Because I haven't decided that." He looked at me then, really looked at me. and the intensity in his gold eyes made it hard to breathe. "You're different, Isla. You see things other people miss. You're not blinded by fear or ambition or the desire to please me. I thought maybe you could see something I've overlooked, some pattern I've missed. You want me to find the answer in books?" I gestured at the stack. "When scholars and mages couldn't? No. I want you to find the answer in me." He leaned forward, close enough that I could see the exhaustion written in the lines around his eyes. "You've been observing me for weeks now, watching how I move, how I think, how I transform. You've seen all three forms. You stayed with me through the dark moon even though you had no reason to." His voice dropped lower. "Tell me what you see, not what you think I want to hear, but the truth. Am I someone who can be loved? All three parts of me, man, wolf, beast? Or am I just fooling myself?" The question hung in the air between us, impossibly heavy. I thought about the man who'd saved me from my father's pack, who'd given me a beautiful room and access to a library that held more books than I'd known existed, who spoke to me like I was an equal rather than a broken omega. I thought about the wolf who'd carried me through the forest, showing me waterfalls and standing stones and moonlit valleys, who'd let me touch his fur and rest my hand on his head while we watched the stars. I thought about the beast I'd heard through the door, the rage and pain and desperate loneliness in that roar, the gentle scrape of claws acknowledging my presence. "I think," I said slowly, choosing each word carefully, "that you're someone who's been taught that parts of yourself are unlovable, that your father spent your whole life convincing you that the beast inside you made you a monster, and that curse just reinforced what you'd already been trained to believe." His expression flickered. "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." I met his gaze steadily. "You asked if you can be loved. The real question is, do you believe you deserve to be?" The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the whisper of pages settling in the books around us, the distant sound of wind against the castle walls. My own heartbeat, too fast and too loud. "No," he said finally, the word barely audible. "I don't." Something in my chest cracked open. Not with pity, I'd told him the truth about that, but with understanding. With recognition of a pain that mirrored my own. "Then that's your answer," I said softly. "The curse won't break until you believe you're worth saving. Because how can anyone else love you, all of you, if you can't love yourself?" He flinched like I'd struck him. That's not how curses work. They require external forces. Someone else's love, someone else's sacrifice. Do they?" I leaned forward, pulling one of the books toward me and finding the passage he'd marked. "The curse was lifted when the Lord found that which he most desired, not when someone else gave him what he needed, when he found it." I looked up at him. "What if what you most desire isn't someone else's validation? What if it's accepting yourself? That's..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "That's too simple. Is it? Or is it the hardest thing you can imagine?" The look he gave me was equal parts frustration, and something that might have been hope. "You're infuriating. You know that? I've been told." I settled back against the cushions. "But you asked for honesty, not comfort." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the books spread between us like they might suddenly reveal secrets they'd been hiding for centuries. Then, he did something unexpected. He smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine, that transformed his entire face. "My name is Cyrus," he said. "I've been thinking. You should probably know my actual name. If we're going to have honest conversations about my deepest insecurities." The offering felt significant, intimate, like he was giving me something precious that he rarely shared. "Cyrus," I tested the name, liking the way it felt. "It suits you, does it?" "Yes. It means sun in the old language, doesn't it? And you are like the sun, powerful and bright and necessary, but also dangerous if you get too close." His smile widened. "Are you planning to get too close, Isla?" The question was light, teasing, even. But there was something underneath it, something that made my pulse quicken. "I don't know," I admitted. "Are you?" The air between us shifted, became charged with a tension that had nothing to do with curses or observations or the task he'd set me. This was something else, something I wasn't prepared for and didn't know how to navigate. Cyrus seemed to feel it too. His smile faded, replaced by an intensity that made it hard to look away. "I should let you sleep," he said, but he didn't move. "It's late. I'm not tired. Liar, you're one to talk." I gestured at the books. "How many nights have you spent down here, searching through these texts, instead of sleeping?" "Too many to count." He stood, stretching, and I tried not to notice the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders. "But you're right, we should both rest." He offered me his hand, helping me to my feet. But when I was standing, he didn't let go immediately. Just held my hand in his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that was probably unconscious but felt devastatingly deliberate. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying that night, for these conversations, for not looking at me like I'm something broken beyond repair." "You're not broken," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. "You're hurt. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." I squeezed his hand. "Broken things can't be fixed. Hurt things can heal. You just need someone patient enough to help you through the process." His eyes searched mine, looking for something. "And you're that patient?" The real question beneath his words was clear. "Will you stay? Will you see this through? Will you still be here when the next dark moon comes?" "Yes," I said simply. "I am." He released my hand slowly, reluctantly. "Then, I suppose I should try to make myself worthy of that patience." We walked back through the library together, not touching but close enough that our shoulders occasionally brushed. He left me at the base of the stairs that led to my chambers, giving me a small bow that somehow didn't feel mocking. "Good night, Isla." "Good night, Cyrus." I climbed the stairs, aware of his eyes following me, until I disappeared from view. And when I reached my rooms and closed the door behind me, I pressed my palm against the wood and tried to ignore the way my heart was racing. I'd come here to observe, to analyze, to provide an objective assessment. But somewhere along the way, objectivity had become impossible. The next morning, I found a gift waiting outside my door. It was a book old and leather-bound, with gilt edges and a title embossed in fading gold letters, Tales of Transformation, a collection of stories about change, curses, and the nature of true form. Inside the front cover, in that same bold, angular handwriting from the note, asterisk for the girl who sees beyond surfaces. "May you find in these pages what I could not." 2000 of. See, I carried the book to my reading chair and opened it to the first story. It was about a woman cursed to become a bird during daylight hours, only returning to human form at night. She lived alone for years, unable to maintain relationships because she could never be fully present in either form. The curse was broken, the story claimed, when she finally stopped trying to fight her transformation and instead learned to find joy in both forms. When she accepted that she was both woman and bird, equally valuable in each shape. I read late into the afternoon, devouring story after story. Each one was different curses, different creatures, different resolutions. But they all had the same underlying message. Transformation wasn't the curse. Fighting against your true nature was. When evening came, and I heard the familiar scratch at my door, that meant Cyrus was in wolf form and ready to run, I set the book aside with new understanding. He wasn't just showing me his forms, so I could observe them. He was asking me to help him accept them. I opened the door to find the massive black wolf waiting, gold eyes bright with anticipation. But this time, instead of just climbing onto his back, I knelt first and pressed my forehead against his. "Thank you for the book," I whispered. "I understand now what you need from me." The wolf made a soft sound, almost like a sigh of relief. Then we ran into the forest together, and for the first time, I paid attention not just to where we were going, but to him, to the way he moved with such fluid grace, to the joy that radiated from him in this form, unencumbered by the weight of the crown or the fear of the curse. This was where he felt most free, most himself, and as we raced beneath the stars, I found myself thinking about the question he'd asked last night. Am I someone who can be loved? The answer was forming in my mind, dangerous and true and terrifying in its implications. But I wasn't ready to speak it aloud yet. Not until I was sure I understood what I was really feeling. Not until I could be certain it wasn't just sympathy or loneliness or the strange intimacy of shared brokenness. Because if I was going to answer that question honestly, if I was going to help him break this curse, I needed to be absolutely sure that what I was feeling was real, even if the truth of it scared me more than any beast ever could. Chapter 6. The Vulnerable Confession. The weeks that followed became the strangest and most precious of my entire life. Cyrus stopped hiding. Not completely, he was still the Alpha King, still had a territory to rule and political machinations to navigate, but with me, the walls came down piece by piece. We fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite its strangeness. Mornings, I'd find him in the training yard, shirtless and glistening with sweat as he sparred with his guards. He'd catch my eye and grin, that rare genuine smile that made him look young and almost carefree. Sometimes he'd call me down, insisting I learn basic self-defense despite my protests that I'd never be a fighter. "You don't need to be a warrior," he'd say, adjusting my stance with careful hands. "But you should know how to protect yourself, how to survive." His hands would linger on my waist, my shoulders, longer than strictly necessary for instruction, and I'd catch myself leaning into the touch, hungry for the contact in ways that should have alarmed me. Afternoons belonged to the library. We'd sit in that same reading nook, books spread between us, debating theories about curses and transformation. He was brilliant in ways I hadn't expected, not just educated, but genuinely curious, willing to consider ideas that challenged everything he thought he knew. "What if the three forms aren't separate at all?" I asked one day, curled up in the corner of the nook with a text about ancient magic. "What if they're just different expressions of the same core being?" Cyrus looked up from his own book, considering. "Like facets of a gem?" "Exactly. Each one shows you something different, but they're all part of the same whole." I leaned forward, excited by the idea. "The man is your intellect, your strategy, your ability to connect with others on a verbal level. The wolf is your instinct, your freedom, your connection to something primal and true. And the beast is my rage," he finished, his expression darkening. "My violence, everything destructive about me. Or," I countered gently, "it's your raw power, your refusal to be controlled, your ability to protect what matters at any cost." I set my book aside. "You keep talking about the beast like it's a separate entity that invaded your body, but what if it's just the part of you that your father tried to suppress? The part that refused to break no matter how much he hurt you?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "My father used to beat me when I showed emotion. Said it was weak, unbecoming of an heir." His hand clenched on the book he held. "The first time I became the beast, I destroyed half the dungeon, tore through stone and steel like they were paper, and all I could think was how happy he'd be that he was right. I was a monster after all." "You're not a monster, Cyrus. You haven't seen me like that, not really." He finally met my eyes. "You heard me through the door, but you didn't see what I become. The claws, the scales, the complete loss of control. Do you hurt anyone when you're like that?" "What?" "In beast form," I pressed. "Do you attack people? Try to break free and kill?" "No, but only because of the wards, or because even in that form, you're still you. Still in control, even when it doesn't feel like it." I moved closer, drawn by the pain in his eyes. "You said you've been cursed for 8 years. In that time, have you ever actually harmed anyone during the transformation?" "No," he admitted reluctantly. "But I could. That's what makes it dangerous. We're all dangerous, Cyrus. You could kill me right now in human form if you wanted to. In wolf form, you could tear out my throat before I could scream. But you don't. Because the form doesn't determine the person determines how the form is used." He stared at me like I'd just rewritten something fundamental in his understanding of the world. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Take something I've believed for years and just dismantle it. Make it sound simple when it's not." "Maybe it is simple," I said softly. "Maybe we just make it complicated, because simple truths are harder to accept than complex lies." He reached out then, slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, his hand cupped my cheek, thumb brushing across my cheekbone in a touch so gentle it made my breath catch. "You're remarkable," he murmured. "You know that?" My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I'm just an omega who reads too much." "No." His gold eyes held mine, intense and searching. You're someone who sees the truth beneath the surface. Who looks at a dying wolf and sees something worth saving. Who looks at a cursed king and sees a person instead of a problem. The air between us felt charged, electric. I was acutely aware of how close we were, of the warmth of his palm against my skin, of the way his gaze kept dropping to my lips before dragging back up to my eyes. "Cyrus," I whispered, not even sure what I was asking for. He leaned closer, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face. "Tell me to stop." I should have. This was dangerous territory. I was here to observe, to analyze, to remain objective. Getting involved like this would compromise everything, but I didn't want to stop. Didn't want him to pull away. Wanted, desperately, to close the distance between us and find out if his lips were as soft as they looked. A knock at the library door shattered the moment like glass. Cyrus pulled back immediately, his expression shuddering. "Enter." Meredith appeared, her face apologetic. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, but Ambassador Rourke has arrived. He says it's urgent." Cyrus stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Of course it is." He looked back at me, something like regret flickering in his eyes. "I have to." "I know, go." He hesitated, like he wanted to say something more. Then he just nodded and left, leaving me alone with racing thoughts and a heart that wouldn't slow down. That evening, Cyrus didn't come for our usual run. I waited in the courtyard as the sun set, telling myself it was fine. He was busy. He had responsibilities that didn't revolve around me, but disappointment still sat heavy in my chest. I was turning to go back inside when I heard a howl from the forest. Not close, but not far either. The sound was haunting, full of loneliness that made my heart ache. I knew that voice, that howl. Without thinking, I ran. The guards called after me, but I ignored them. I knew the path now, had run it enough times to navigate even in the growing darkness. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I reached the cliff where we'd sat that first night. The black wolf stood at the edge, silhouetted against the darkening sky. His head was tilted back, and as I watched, he howled again, a sound so full of pain and yearning that tears sprang to my eyes. "Cyrus," I called softly. He spun, ears flattening when he saw me. Then he shifted, so fast I barely saw it happen, and suddenly the man stood there instead. Still shirtless from the transformation, breathing hard. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said roughly. "It's not safe. Neither should you." I moved closer, not caring about propriety or the fact that he was half naked. "What happened?" "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar." I stopped a few feet away. "Talk to me, please." For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. Thought he'd shift back to wolf form and run away from this conversation. Like he'd been running from everything real and vulnerable. Instead, he sank down to sit on the cold ground, his elbows on his knees, head bowed. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. "The ambassador brought news from the Southern Territory," he said finally, his voice flat. "Alpha Garrett is hosting a gathering in 2 weeks, a celebration of the spring equinox." He laughed bitterly. "But, really, it's a marriage market. Every unmated alpha and beta from all 5 territories will be there, along with eligible females from prominent families." Understanding dawned, cold and heavy. "He expects you to attend. He more than expects it. He's made it clear that my continued absence from such events is causing concern. Questions about my ability to produce an heir. Speculation about whether the crown is secure." His hands clenched into fists. "I'm expected to choose a mate, Isla. Someone appropriate, someone whole, someone who can give me the heirs the kingdom demands." The words landed like blows, each one a reminder of what I wasn't, what I could never be. "You should go," I managed, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You need a mate. An heir. That's not something you can avoid forever." "I don't want." He cut himself off, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter what I want." "Yes, it does." "Does it?" He finally looked at me, and the anguish in his eyes stole my breath. "I'm the king, Isla. My wants are secondary to the needs of the kingdom, and the kingdom needs stability, continuity. A clear line of succession. Things you can't have with someone cursed to become a beast 3 nights a month. Things I can't have with anyone until this curse is broken. He turned away, staring out at the darkening forest. And maybe not even then. Because even if I break the curse, even if I find someone willing to accept all 3 forms, there's still the question of whether I'm capable of being what a mate needs. Whether I can be gentle enough, patient enough, human enough to maintain that kind of bond. The doubt in his voice cracked something open in my chest. This wasn't just about the curse. This was deeper, a fundamental belief that he was unworthy of love in any form. "Can I tell you something?" I asked quietly. "Always. When Theron rejected me, when he announced to the entire pack that I was worthless because I couldn't give him children, I thought my life was over. Not metaphorically, actually over. Because in our world, a female's value is measured in her ability to breed, to continue bloodlines, to strengthen packs through strategic reproduction." I pulled my knees to my chest, staring at the same darkening forest. I believed him when he said I was defective, broken beyond repair, a waste of space and resources. Cyrus made a sound of protest, but I continued. "And then I met you. This powerful, brilliant, complicated man who looked at me like I was worth listening to, who gave me books and freedom and actual choices about how to spend my time, who never once made me feel like my value was tied to my ability to have children." I turned to look at him. "You taught me that I was more than my broken parts, more than what I couldn't do." His eyes searched mine, intense and desperate. "Isla, so let me return the favor." I reached out, taking his hand in both of mine. "You are not your curse, Cyrus. You're not the beast, or the wolf, or even the king. You're a person who's been hurt so badly that you've forgotten what it's like to be seen as anything other than a problem to be solved or a threat to be contained." I squeezed his hand. "But I see you, all of you. And there's nothing defective about what I see." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the wind whispering through the pines below us. Could hear the distant call of night birds and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Could hear the sharp intake of breath as something broke in Cyrus's carefully maintained control. "I can't have children either," he said abruptly, the words tumbling out like a confession too long held. "The curse. It doesn't just affect my forms. It affects everything. I've consulted healers, had every test imaginable. The magic that binds me also ensures I can't produce an heir." His laugh was broken, bitter. "Ironic, isn't it? The kingdom demands I mate and secure the succession, but I'm as barren as—" He cut himself off, but the damage was done. "As barren as me. As broken. As worthless. Does anyone else know?" I asked softly. "Meredith, my personal healer, no one else." He pulled his hand from mine, scrubbing it over his face. If it became public knowledge, the territory would descend into chaos. Every alpha with ambitions would see it as an opportunity to challenge for the throne. The fragile peace I've built would shatter. "So you're trapped." Understanding crystallized, cold and sharp. "You can't mate because of the curse, but you can't reveal you're sterile because it would destabilize the kingdom. You're forced to play this game of pretending you're still searching for the right match, when the truth is I'm as worthless as my father always said I was." His voice was hollow. "I can't break the curse, can't produce an heir, can't be the king this territory deserves. I'm just playing a role, buying time before everything falls apart." "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Stop talking about yourself like you're disposable. Aren't I? I'm a king who can't secure succession, a male who can't fulfill the basic biological purpose of his gender. You're someone who united 5 territories that were on the brink of civil war," I interrupted. "Who established laws that protect the weak from the strong, who built a kingdom based on justice rather than brute force, who gave a broken Omega a chance at something better when he had no reason to." I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. "Your value isn't determined by whether you can have children, Cyrus. It's determined by what you do with the life you've been given." "That's easy for you to say." "Is it?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've spent my entire life being told my only value was in breeding potential I don't have. That I'm defective, worthless, a drain on pack resources. I leaned closer, making sure he couldn't look away. But you made me believe I was more than that. Made me see that intelligence and compassion, and the ability to see beyond surface appearances, have value too. So don't you dare sit here and tell me you're worthless when you're the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered. His eyes widened, something flickering in their golden depths that might have been hope. Isla, we're both broken, I whispered, both barren, both cast aside by a world that measures worth in bloodlines and breeding. But together, I stopped, suddenly aware of what I'd been about to say. Together, we're enough. Together, we're whole. But that wasn't true, couldn't be true, because I was here temporarily, because he needed a real mate, not a damaged Omega who couldn't give him anything he actually needed. Because I was falling in love with him, and that was the most dangerous thing I could possibly do. Cyrus seemed to realize it at the same moment. His expression shifted, became guarded again. He pulled back gently, putting distance between us. You should go back to the castle, he said quietly. It's getting cold, and you're not dressed for this weather. Cyrus, please. The word was almost pleading. I need to think. About the gathering. About what happens next. He was shutting down, pulling away again, building those walls back up brick by brick. I should have pushed, should have forced him to finish this conversation, to acknowledge what was growing between us. Instead, I stood. Will you run tonight, after you've thought? Probably. Then I'll wait in the courtyard, just in case. I left him there on the cliff, silhouetted against the night sky, looking more alone than anyone should ever have to be. He didn't come to the courtyard that night, or the next. For 3 days, I barely saw him. He was avoiding me again, and this time I couldn't even blame him. I'd pushed too hard, revealed too much, crossed lines that should have stayed firmly in place. On the 4th day, I found another note under my door. I'm going to the gathering. I leave in 2 days. When I return, we need to talk about what happens next. What you want. What I can offer. I'm sorry for being a coward. Again. Today. Rekid finds it friends. I read the note 3 times, trying to decode what he was really saying. He was going to the marriage market. Going to choose a mate from eligible females who could actually give him what he needed, even if it was a lie, even if he'd never have children. He could at least keep up the appearance of trying. And when he returned, he'd release me from our arrangement. Give me the freedom and fresh start he'd promised. Send me away with gratitude and enough resources to build a new life somewhere far from here. It was the logical choice, the right choice. So why did it feel like my heart was being ripped from my chest? I spent those 2 days in the library, surrounded by books about curses and transformation, searching desperately for something I'd missed. Some clue about how to break the curse before he left, but there was nothing. Just the same vague promises about true love and acceptance that I'd read 100 times. On the morning he was supposed to leave, I watched from my window as he mounted his horse in the courtyard. He was dressed in formal clothing, black and silver, every inch the powerful king, beautiful and distant and completely unreachable. He looked up at my window once, as if sensing my gaze. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw everything I felt reflected in his face. Longing, regret, the terrible knowledge that we were both about to make a choice that would destroy something precious before we'd fully understood what it was. Then he turned his horse and rode through the gates, taking 6 guards with him, and I was left alone in a castle that suddenly felt enormous and empty. Meredith found me that evening, still standing at the window, watching the road long after he'd disappeared from view. He'll come back, she said gently. He always does. I know. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. But when he does, everything will be different. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that girl he rejected you for. Your sister. Does she have what you and the king both lack? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Then perhaps, Meredith said softly. The 3 of you are more alike than different. Perhaps you and he found each other precisely because you understand a pain that most people can't comprehend. That's not enough to break a curse, isn't it? She moved to stand beside me at the window. Every story about broken curses involves impossible love. Love that shouldn't exist. Love that defies logic and reason. Love that accepts what the world calls unacceptable. She glanced at me. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It doesn't matter, I whispered. He's gone to find a proper mate. Someone who can give him what he needs. No, child. He's gone to prove to himself that what he needs doesn't exist anywhere else. Meredith's hand touched my shoulder briefly. Sometimes people have to walk away to understand what they're walking away from. She left me alone with those words, and the growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. I should have told him the truth before he left. Should have said the words that were burning in my chest, demanding to be spoken. Should have admitted that somewhere between saving a dying wolf and learning a broken king's name, I'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with him. All three forms, all three parts. The answer to his question had been forming for weeks, but only now, watching him ride away to choose someone else, did I fully understand it. Yes, Cyrus. You can be loved. You are loved. By me. But the realization had come too late. And now all I could do was wait for him to return with a mate who would take the place I'd never been qualified to fill. Drop a comment if you've ever walked away from something you wanted because you were too afraid it wasn't real. Tell me, should Isla have fought harder? Or was protecting her heart the right choice? Let's talk about it below. Because this story isn't just about them. It's about all of us who've loved the wrong way at the wrong time. Chapter 7. The Year of Hollow Freedom. Cyrus returned from the gathering after 10 days. I heard the commotion in the courtyard, horses, voices, the clatter of armor and weapons being secured. My heart leaped into my throat, and I moved to the window before I could stop myself. He was dismounting, his movements tired but fluid. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion written in every line of his body. He looked up, as if sensing my gaze, and our eyes met across the courtyard. For a moment, just a heartbeat, his expression was completely unguarded. Raw, with something that might have been relief or longing, or both. Then someone spoke to him, and he turned away, and the moment shattered. I waited all day for him to come to me. Tried to read in the library, but couldn't focus on the words. Paced my chambers until Meredith brought dinner, and gave me a sympathetic look that made everything worse. He's in meetings, child. Territory business that couldn't wait, but he asked me to tell you. She hesitated. He said to tell you he kept his word, that you're free to leave whenever you wish, and he'll provide everything promised. The words landed like stones in my chest. He's releasing me from our arrangement. He's giving you a choice. Meredith corrected gently. There's a difference. After she left, I sat at my window and watched the sun set over the mountains, trying to understand what I was feeling. Relief? Disappointment? Terror at the thought of leaving this place that had somehow become home? All of it. None of it. Everything at once. The knock on my door came just after midnight. I knew it was him before I opened it, could feel his presence like a physical thing, the way I'd learned to over the past months. Cyrus stood in the hallway, still in his formal clothes but rumpled now, like he'd been wearing them for days without rest. His hair was disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped back, letting him enter. He moved to the window, the same window where I'd stood countless times watching for him, and braced his hands against the frame, staring out at the darkness. "I didn't choose anyone," he said abruptly. At the gathering, there were opportunities, appropriate matches, females from good families with strong bloodlines and no complications. His hands tightened on the window frame, and I couldn't do it, couldn't even pretend to be interested. Hope flared in my chest, dangerous and bright. Why not? Because they weren't you. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made it hard to breathe. I spent 10 days at that gathering trying to convince myself that any of those females could give me what I need, that I could learn to care for someone appropriate, someone who wouldn't complicate everything. He laughed bitterly. But all I could think about was you. The way you look when you're reading and don't realize I'm watching. The way you argue with me about curses like you're not remotely intimidated. The way you stayed outside that door during the dark moon when you had every reason to run away. Cyrus, let me finish, please. He took a step closer. I'm offering you a choice, Isla. You can leave. Take the resources I promised and build a new life somewhere far from here. Somewhere safe, where you can be free of curses and complicated kings and all of this." He gestured around the room. "Or you can stay. Not as my observer or my problem solver, but as someone I want in my life. In whatever capacity you're willing to give." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. "What are you asking?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I can't offer you a mate bond, not until the curse is broken, and maybe not even then. I can't give you children or the security of a traditional relationship. I can't even promise I won't have to marry someone else eventually for political reasons." His voice dropped lower. "But I can offer you honesty, partnership, a place at my side for as long as you want it, and," he swallowed hard, "and my heart, if you want it, for whatever that's worth." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. He was offering me everything and nothing at once. A relationship with no guarantees, no traditional structure, no promise of forever. But he was offering me himself, the man, the wolf, the beast, all three forms, all three parts, exactly as they were. "I need to think," I heard myself say. Pain flashed across his face, quickly hidden. "Of course, take all the time you need. There's no pressure, no obligation." "Cyrus." I moved closer, close enough to touch. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need to think about what this means. For both of us. Because once I make this choice, I won't take it back. I won't leave just because things get difficult or complicated or scary." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're protecting me. I'm protecting both of us." I touched his face gently, feeling the rasp of stubble against my palm. "You've been hurt enough. You don't need someone who'll stay because they're grateful or obligated. You need someone who chooses you fully, knowing exactly what they're choosing." He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing briefly. "And you need to be sure you're not just choosing me because you're lonely, or because I'm the only person who's been kind to you." "Yes." We stood like that for a long moment, caught between what we wanted and what we needed to be sure of. Finally, he pulled back gently. "How long do you need?" "I don't know. A few days? A week? Take as long as you need." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Isla? Whatever you decide. Thank you. For being honest. For not just telling me what I want to hear." After he left, I sank onto my bed and tried to think clearly. I loved him. That much was certain. Had loved him for weeks, maybe since that first night when he'd looked at me with wolf's eyes and I'd seen something in him that mirrored my own brokenness. But was love enough? Could we build something real from two broken people who couldn't give each other what the world said relationships required? I spent 3 days wrestling with the question. Reading in the library, walking in the gardens, having long conversations with Meredith that danced around the real issue without ever quite addressing it directly. On the 4th day, I woke with absolute clarity. I was walking to Cyrus's chambers to tell him my decision when Meredith intercepted me in the hallway. Her face was pale, stricken. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. "He's gone." Her voice shook. "The king left last night. Took his fastest horse and rode out alone. No guards, no explanation. He left a note for me saying he'd be gone for a while. That he needed distance, perspective." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "He left? There's more." Meredith's hands twisted in her apron. "A messenger arrived this morning from Alpha Garrett. Apparently, after the king left the gathering, he returned privately a few days later, met with Alpha Garrett and his daughter, Elena. The messenger says." She couldn't seem to force the words out. "Says what?" "That there's to be an announcement. A formal ceremony in 1 month's time. The Alpha King is taking a mate." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. Cyrus had just been here 4 days ago, offering me his heart, asking me to stay. "He lied," I whispered. "He was already promised to her. That's why he left. He couldn't face me after." "We don't know that," Meredith said quickly. "The messenger could be wrong. Rumors spread, especially about the king. But I knew the truth with sudden, devastating certainty. Cyrus had offered me everything because he'd known I would need time to think, time to refuse. And while I was thinking, he'd made the practical choice, the royal choice, the choice that protected his kingdom even if it destroyed his heart. He'd chosen duty over desire, and he'd been too much of a coward to tell me to my face. "I need to leave," I said numbly. "Now. Today." "Isla, please, wait until he returns. Let him explain." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. He made his choice. I'm making mine. You said I was free to leave whenever I wished. I wish to leave now. Meredith's face crumpled with sympathy. "Where will you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere I'll never have to hear about the Alpha King and his perfect mate and their—" My voice broke. "Just somewhere else." Within 6 hours, I was gone. Meredith helped me pack, tears streaming down her face. She gave me a purse heavy with gold coins, far more than Cyrus had promised, and a letter of introduction that would grant me safe passage through any territory. "He's not marrying her because he wants to," she said as I was leaving. "You must know that." "It doesn't matter why," I said quietly. "It only matters that he is." I took one of the smaller horses and rode east, away from the castle and the mountains and the library full of books about curses that couldn't be broken. Away from the courtyard where I'd waited for a wolf who never came. Away from the man who'd taught me I was worth something, and then proved I wasn't worth enough. The cottage I found was tiny compared to the castle, but larger than my original cabin. It sat on the border of neutral territory, far enough from any packlands that I wouldn't be bothered by politics or hierarchies. Meredith's gold bought me the property outright, along with supplies that would last through the winter. I planted a garden in the spring, tended it through the summer, and harvested enough in fall to sustain myself. I lived quietly, simply, alone. Travelers would stop sometimes, trading goods or news. That's how I learned about the world beyond my little cottage, about territory disputes and pack alliances and the continuing rule of the Alpha King. No one mentioned a mate. No ceremony was ever announced. For months, I held on to hope that it had been a rumor, a mistake. Then, a year after I'd left the castle, a merchant passed through with news that made my heart stop. "The Alpha King is finally taking a mate," she said cheerfully, counting out coins for the herbs I'd sold her. "There's to be a grand ceremony in 2 weeks. Every Alpha in 5 territories will attend. They say the bride is beautiful, some foreign princess from beyond the western mountains. Perfect match for him, they say. Strong bloodlines, powerful family connections." I smiled and nodded, and said something appropriate about how wonderful that was for the kingdom. After she left, I sat in my garden and stared at nothing. A year. I'd spent an entire year in this cottage, telling myself I was building a new life, telling myself I was free, but freedom without him was just another cage. The books he'd given me sat on my shelf, unread. The fancy dresses from the castle still hung in my wardrobe, unworn. Every night I dreamed of running through forests on the back of a black wolf, and every morning I woke alone. I'd tried to forget him, tried to move on, tried to convince myself that what we'd had was temporary and fragile and better left in the past. But the heart doesn't listen to logic, and mine was still in that castle, still in that library, still caught in the moment before he'd walked away. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, he'd marry someone else, someone appropriate. Someone who could be his queen in ways I never could, and I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd just been brave enough to say yes when he'd asked. If I'd chosen him, instead of protecting both of us from potential heartbreak. I'd spent a year in hollow freedom, and it had taught me exactly one thing. Safety wasn't worth the cost if it meant losing the only person who'd ever made me feel alive. The night before his wedding, I sat in my garden and watched the stars emerge one by one. I thought about curses and transformation, about fairy tales where true love breaks impossible spells, about the riddle I'd told Cyrus that first night in beast form, when I was desperate and frightened and trying to buy myself time. What is given freely but never taken? What is spoken without words? What endures beyond death, but can be destroyed by doubt? I'd never told him the answer. Never explained what I'd been thinking when I'd chosen those words. The answer was a promise, not the spoken kind, formal and binding, but the unspoken promise between 2 people who see each other clearly and choose each other anyway. The promise that says, I will stay, I will fight, I will love you even when it's hard. I'd broken that promise when I left. And he'd broken it when he'd chosen duty over desire. And now it was too late to fix. I went inside as the moon rose, not wanting to watch it anymore. Not wanting to think about wolf runs and libraries and gold eyes that had looked at me like I was something precious. Tomorrow, Cyrus would marry someone else, and I'd have to find a way to live with the knowledge that I'd had everything I wanted, and walked away because I'd been too afraid to believe it was real. I woke the next morning to pounding on my door. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled from bed and opened it to find a messenger in royal livery, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. "Are you Isla?" he demanded. "Former resident of the northern castle?" "Yes," I said warily. He thrust a sealed letter at me. "From Meredith, the king's housekeeper. She said it was urgent, that you'd know what to do." He was gone before I could ask questions, spurring his exhausted horse back down the path. I broke the seal with shaking hands and unfolded the letter. "Isla, I don't know if you'll come. I don't know if you even care anymore, but I have to try. The wedding is today, in 6 hours, and it's wrong. All of it is wrong. I've served the king since he was a boy. I've watched him survive his father's cruelty, take the throne, build a kingdom from the ruins of civil war. I've never seen him afraid of anything, but yesterday, I saw him in his chambers, staring at that black door that leads to the beast, and he was terrified. Not of the transformation he's faced that 100 times. He was terrified that he's about to lock himself into a life where he'll never be truly known, never be truly accepted, never be truly loved. He's marrying her because he thinks it's what he deserves. Punishment for letting you go, for being too afraid to fight for what he wanted. But you know the truth, don't you? You know what he needs to break the curse. Someone who loves all 3 forms equally. Someone who sees the man, the wolf, and the beast as one being worthy of devotion. Someone like you. The ceremony is at noon in Alpha Garrett's territory. I've enclosed a map and a token that will grant you passage. Whether you use them is your choice. But Isla, if you love him at all, if any part of what you shared was real, please come. Not for the kingdom, not for duty or obligation. Come because he's standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump, and you're the only one who can pull him back. Please, Meredith." I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking harder with each pass. 6 hours. The ceremony was in 6 hours, and I was at least a 4-hour ride from Garrett's territory, even on a fast horse. I'd arrive right in the middle of the wedding. This was insane, reckless. I had no plan, no speech prepared, no idea what I'd even say if I managed to get there in time. But none of that mattered, because Meredith was right. I loved him. All of him. Man, wolf, beast, every part, and if I didn't at least try to tell him that, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if things could have been different. I was dressed and saddled within 10 minutes, the map clutched in one hand and hope burning bright and terrifying in my chest. The Alpha King was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and I was going to stop him, even if it killed me. Chapter 8. The Wedding and the Truth. I rode harder than I'd ever ridden in my life. The horse Meredith's messenger had brought was built for speed, a sleek gray mare with powerful legs and a heart that seemed as desperate as mine. We flew down forest paths and across meadows, ignoring roads in favor of shortcuts that saved precious minutes. My thighs ached, my hands were blistered from gripping the reins. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The sun climbed higher, marking time I didn't have. Every minute that passed brought Cyrus closer to making vows that would bind him to someone else, someone appropriate, someone who wasn't me. I crossed into Garrett's territory just after 11, the token Meredith had sent getting me past border guards, who looked at me with suspicion but let me pass. The capital city rose ahead, all white stone and gleaming towers, decorated with banners and flowers for the royal wedding. Crowds lined the streets. Wolves in their finest clothing, come to witness their king claim a mate. Children waved ribbons. Merchants sold commemorative tokens. Everyone was smiling, celebrating, completely unaware that the groom was making the biggest mistake of his life. I dismounted a block from the main cathedral, my legs nearly buckling when my feet hit the ground. The mare was exhausted, sides heaving, but she'd gotten me here. I pressed my forehead against her neck briefly in gratitude, then pushed through the crowd toward the massive building at the city's heart. Guards stood at every entrance, checking invitations. I had no invitation. No plan for getting inside. Just Meredith's token, and a desperate certainty that I had to reach him before it was too late. I need to get inside. I told the guard at the main entrance, holding up the token. It's urgent. A matter of, no one enters without an invitation, he said flatly. King's orders. Security is tight today. But I have, that's a servant's token, miss. Grants you passage through territories, not into royal ceremonies. His expression wasn't unkind, but it was immovable. You'll have to wait with everyone else. The ceremony will be over in an hour. And then, an hour. I'd be too late. I turned away from the guard, my mind racing. There had to be another way in. A servant's entrance, a back door. Something. The cathedral bells began to ring, deep and resonant. Noon. The ceremony was starting. No, I couldn't be this close and fail. Couldn't let him marry someone else without at least trying to reach him. I ran around the side of the building, looking for any opening. Found a small door unlocked, probably meant for staff, and slipped inside before anyone could stop me. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, all soaring ceilings and stained glass that painted rainbow patterns across marble floors. I could hear music from the main hall, voices raised in ceremonial song. I ran toward the sound, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the stone corridors. A servant saw me and called out, but I ignored them. Turned a corner, found another hallway, another door, and burst into the main cathedral hall just as the officiant was saying, "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or..." Every head turned toward me, hundreds of them, alphas and betas, and visiting dignitaries, all dressed in their finest, all staring at the disheveled Omega, who'd just crashed the royal wedding. I saw Alpha Garrett on his throne, face purpling with rage. Saw the bride at the altar, a beautiful woman with perfect posture and golden hair, her expression a mixture of shock and indignation, and I saw Cyrus. He stood at the altar in formal black, every inch the powerful king. But his face was a mask, carefully blank, hiding everything, until his eyes met mine. Then the mask shattered. "Isla," he breathed. The word barely audible, but somehow carrying in the sudden silence. "I object," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I object to this union." The hall erupted in whispers. Garrett surged to his feet. "How dare you? Guards, remove this." "No." Cyrus's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Let her speak." "Your Majesty." "This is highly irregular." I said, "Let her speak." He stepped away from the altar, away from his bride, his eyes never leaving mine. "What are you doing here, Isla?" Everything I'd planned to say evaporated. All the careful words, the logical arguments, the explanations gone. What came out instead was raw truth. "I love you," I said simply. "All of you. The man who gave me a library and taught me I was worth more than my broken parts. The wolf who carried me through forests and showed me what freedom felt like. The beast you think is a monster but is really just the part of you that refuses to break, no matter how much pain you've endured." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cyrus went absolutely still. "I know I'm not appropriate," I continued, taking a step forward, then another. "I can't give you heirs, can't strengthen your political alliances, can't be the perfect queen this kingdom expects. But I can love you, completely, without conditions, without fear." I stopped a few feet from the altar, close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes. "And I think that's what you need to break the curse. Not someone appropriate, someone real." "You left," he said hoarsely. "A year ago, you left without saying goodbye. Because you did first." The words burst out, angry and hurt and true. "You offered me your heart, and then disappeared before I could tell you I wanted it. I thought you'd lied. Thought you'd chosen her while I was deciding. Thought I left to give you space," he interrupted. "To let you choose freely without me hovering, waiting, hoping. I thought if I disappeared for a few weeks, you could think clearly, make a real decision." His hands clenched at his sides. "When I came back and you were gone, I thought, I thought I had my answer. Understanding crashed over us both at the same time. We'd each run away, each assuming the other didn't want them, each too afraid to fight for what we actually needed. I'm an idiot, I whispered. So am I. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so broken. A year, Isla. I've spent a year trying to convince myself I could do this. Could marry someone appropriate and build a life that made sense even if it meant burying everything I actually wanted. Then don't. I moved closer, close enough to touch. Don't marry her. Don't sacrifice yourself for duty or obligation or what the kingdom expects. Choose what you want. Choose. The cathedral doors burst open with a crash. Armed wolves poured in, at least a dozen of them, wearing the colors of multiple packs. Not guards, attackers. Assassination attempt, someone screamed. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards rushed forward to intercept the attackers. Guests scattered, some shifting to wolf form, others running for exits. Garrett was shouting orders that no one could hear over the din. An arrow flew toward the altar, toward Cyrus. I didn't think. Just moved, threw myself between him and the arrow, feeling the impact hit my shoulder instead of his chest. Pain exploded through me, white-hot and devastating, and I stumbled. Cyrus caught me before I could fall, his face going absolutely white. Isla, no. More arrows, more attackers pressing forward. This was coordinated, planned. They'd been waiting for the ceremony, for the moment when all the kingdom's leaders would be gathered in one vulnerable place. Get her out of here! Cyrus roared at his guards, even as he lowered me carefully to the ground. Get everyone out! No. I grabbed his arm with my good hand, the other hanging useless at my side. Don't you dare try to protect me while you... An attacker broke through the defensive line, lunging toward Cyrus with a blade, and Cyrus transformed, not into the wolf, not into the man, into the beast. The transformation was instantaneous and terrible and magnificent. One moment, a man in formal clothes. The next, the massive scaled creature I'd only seen in the mirror, 7 feet tall with claws like daggers and eyes that glowed molten gold. The attacker froze, terror written across his face. The beast Cyrus roared, and the sound shook the very stones of the cathedral. But he didn't attack. Didn't tear the man apart even though he clearly could have. Instead, he positioned himself between the attackers and the fleeing guests, using his body as a shield, protecting them even in this form. Even when everyone was screaming in fear, because he wasn't a monster. Had never been a monster. He was just someone trying to protect what mattered, even if it meant revealing the thing he feared most. More attackers came at him. He fought them off with terrifying efficiency, not killing. I realized, but disabling. Throwing them back, removing their weapons, buying time for the guards to organize a proper defense. But there were so many of them. Too many, and I was useless on the ground, arrow still embedded in my shoulder, watching him fight alone. No, not alone. I struggled to my feet, ignoring the screaming pain, grabbed a fallen sword from the floor, too heavy, awkward in my offhand, but it was something. Isla, stay down. Cyrus's voice was distorted in beast form, deeper and rougher, but still his. Not a chance. An attacker came at me from the side. I swung clumsily, more luck than skill, but the blade connected. The man went down, and I felt a savage satisfaction that probably should have concerned me. Back to back with the beast, I fought, badly, ineffectively, but I fought, because he'd stood alone for so long. Had faced his curse and his kingdom and his father's cruelty all by himself, and I'd be damned if I'd let him stand alone now. The guards finally rallied, surrounding us in a protective formation. More reinforcements poured in from outside. The attackers, realizing their attempt had failed, tried to flee. Within minutes, it was over. Bodies littered the cathedral floor, unconscious or wounded, but not dead. Cyrus had made sure of that even in beast form. Even when he could have easily killed them all. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone stared at the beast, at their king in his cursed form, standing protectively over me with blood on his claws and rage in his golden eyes. This was the moment I'd been afraid of. The moment when everyone would see what he truly was and reject him. Fear him. Call him monster. But then Alpha Garrett, who'd been hosting this wedding, who'd been about to ally his daughter with the throne, stepped forward slowly. "Your Majesty," he said carefully. "Are you in control?" The beast Cyrus turned those glowing eyes toward him. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You can understand me, while in that form?" Another nod. Garrett looked around at the assembled leaders. At the destruction. At me standing with a sword I barely knew how to hold, and an arrow in my shoulder. "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "we've been misunderstanding the nature of your curse." Cyrus shifted back to human form in a rush. Naked now, the transformation had destroyed his formal clothes, but he didn't seem to care. He caught me, as my legs finally gave out, lowering us both to the ground carefully. "The arrow," he said urgently. "We need to." "I'm fine. It was a lie and we both knew it. You're not marrying her." Despite everything, the pain, the chaos, the audience of hundreds watching us, he laughed. Actually laughed. "No, I'm not." Good. The world was starting to blur around the edges, because I have things to say, about curses, about love, about Isla. His hand cupped my face, gentle despite the claws that had been there moments ago. "You broke the curse." I blinked at him, confused. "What?" The beast. I was in control the entire time. Conscious. Thinking clearly. Fighting to protect instead of destroy. His eyes were bright with tears or wonder or both. "That's never happened before. Never. But you were here, and I couldn't. I couldn't let anything happen to you." And the beast agreed. We agreed. Man, wolf, beast, all three of us wanted the same thing. To protect me. To keep you safe. He pressed his forehead against mine. "You were right. The curse wasn't about the forms. It was about accepting them. All of them. And you made me believe that was possible, that I wasn't a monster just because I had monstrous strength." Around us, I could hear people talking, whispering, processing what they'd just witnessed. "Your Majesty," Meredith's voice, breaking through the fog. "We need to get her to a healer. That arrow." "I know." But Cyrus didn't move, just held me like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. "Why did you do that? Throw yourself in front of an arrow for me?" "Because I love you, you idiot." The words came out slurred, exhaustion and blood loss catching up to me. All three forms, completely, without question. "Thought that was obvious when I crashed your wedding." He laughed again, the sound broken and beautiful. "Say it again." "I love you." "Again." "I love you, Cyrus. Man, wolf, beast. All of it. All of you." Something shifted in the air around us. Magic. Old and powerful, unwinding like a cord that had been pulled too tight for too long. The curse breaking. Finally. Completely. Irreversibly. Cyrus felt it too. His eyes widened, and he pressed his hand over his heart like he was checking to make sure it was real. "It's gone," he whispered. "The curse. I can feel it. It's actually gone. Told you." I managed, even as the world faded further. "Just needed someone to love you properly. Stay with me," he said urgently. "Isla, stay with me. Don't you dare leave now. Not after." "Not leaving," I promised. "Never leaving. You're stuck with me. Forever. Hope you like broken omegas who crash weddings." "I love broken omegas who crash weddings." He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, anywhere he could reach. "I love you. I love you so much it terrifies me." Good. My eyes were closing despite my best efforts. Terror means it's real. The last thing I heard before darkness claimed me was his voice, desperate and determined. "Someone get a healer. Now. She doesn't get to confess her love and then die. That's not how this story ends." I woke in a bed that wasn't mine. Soft sheets, the smell of healing herbs, and pain dull now, manageable, but still present in my shoulder, and a weight on the edge of the mattress. Someone sitting there, holding my hand. "Cyrus?" My voice came out rough. "Thank the gods." He leaned forward immediately, his face coming into focus. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. The healer said you'd be fine, but His voice cracked. I was starting to worry. Takes more than an arrow to kill me. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Ow. Okay, maybe don't do that yet. He helped me settle back against the pillows, his hands gentle. The arrow missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. The healer says you need to rest. At least a week before. Did you marry her? He blinked. What? The princess. Elena. Did you? No. He said it firmly, clearly. I called off the wedding, approximately 30 seconds after you crashed it, and declared your love in front of 500 witnesses. Heat flooded my face. I did that, didn't I? Spectacularly. His mouth curved into a smile. Garrett was furious until the assassination attempt started. Then he was too busy being impressed by the fact that I fought in beast form without killing anyone. The smile faded slightly. Elena took it well, actually. Said she'd always known my heart wasn't in it. Wished me luck finding someone who'd willingly crash a royal wedding for me. She sounds nice. She is. Which is why I'm not marrying her. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles. I'm marrying you, if you'll have me, if you still meant what you said. My heart stuttered. Cyrus. I know all the logical arguments. He interrupted. I know we can't have children. I know it complicates succession. I know every alpha in 5 territories will have opinions about their king mating a non-shifter Omega. He met my eyes steadily. I don't care. I've spent 8 years living according to what was logical and appropriate and expected, and it nearly destroyed me. So I'm done with that. I'm choosing what I want, and what I want is you. Tears blurred my vision. I can't give you heirs. Neither can I, remember? We're equally broken in that regard. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. But we can build something else. A different kind of legacy, one based on how we rule, not who we produce. On the changes we make, the lives we protect, the kingdom we build together. People will talk. Let them. He leaned closer. Isla, you threw yourself in front of an arrow for me. You crashed my wedding. You loved me even when I was convinced I was unlovable. You saw all 3 of my forms and didn't run away. His voice dropped lower. I don't need heirs. I don't need political alliances. I need you. Exactly as you are. Broken parts and all. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard, I said through tears. Is it? He smiled. Then let me try again. He slid off the bed and knelt beside it, still holding my hand. Isla, you're infuriating and brilliant and brave to the point of recklessness. You argue with me about curses, you read my books without permission, and you have absolutely no sense of self-preservation. You're everything I never knew I needed, and everything I was afraid to want. His gold eyes held mine. Will you marry me? Will you be my mate, my partner, my queen? Will you help me rule this kingdom and drive me absolutely insane for the rest of our lives? I was crying openly now, but I was also laughing. That's not much better. I'm new at this. Give me time to improve. His expression turned serious. Is that a yes? Yes. The word came out clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll be your mate. I'll help you rule and argue with you and love you until the day I die. He surged up, kissing me with a desperation that spoke of all the fear and hope and relief he'd been holding back. I kissed him back, ignoring the protest from my injured shoulder, pouring everything I felt into the contact. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. The riddle, he said softly. The one you asked that first night. I figured out the answer. Did you? A promise. His hand cupped my face. What is given freely but never taken? What is spoken without words? What endures beyond death but can be destroyed by doubt? A promise. The unspoken kind that 2 people make when they choose each other despite everything. You understood all along, I whispered. Not all along, but eventually. He kissed me again, softer this time. I promise, Isla. I will choose you every day. I will love you in all your forms even though you only have one. I will build a life with you that's based on what we are, not what we can't be. I promise too, I said against his lips. To stay, to fight, To love you even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Even when I'm in beast form? Especially then. Someone needs to make sure you don't destroy all the furniture. He laughed, and the sound was so full of joy and relief that my heart felt like it might burst. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, making promises we'd spend the rest of our lives keeping. Eventually, there would be logistics to work out, a kingdom to convince, political challenges to navigate, all the complicated reality of two broken people trying to build something whole. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because I'd crashed a wedding, taken an arrow, and told a cursed king that he was worth loving, and he'd believed me, and that was where the real magic lived. Epilogue. 3 months later. The coronation was smaller than traditional ceremonies. Only the 5 territory alphas and their immediate councils. Cyrus had insisted on it. Said he didn't need pomp and spectacle. Just the people who mattered, bearing witness to a promise he'd never thought he'd make. I stood beside him in a dress the color of deep forest green, not white, because neither of us had any illusions about traditional purity. My shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that Cyrus traced sometimes when he thought I was asleep. The officiant, a different one this time, since the last ceremony had ended in attempted assassination, spoke the traditional words about bonds and partnership and the responsibilities of rule. But when it came time for our vows, Cyrus abandoned the script entirely. I promise, he said, his voice carrying in the small hall, to let you argue with me about curses, to run with you through forests even when it's inconvenient, to give you unlimited access to my library and only moderately complain when you reorganize it. His mouth curved into a smile. And to love you completely, in all your forms, even though you only have one for as long as we both live. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. My turn. I looked up at him, this man who'd been a dying wolf, a broken king, a cursed beast, and felt my own eyes burn with tears. I promise, I said, my voice shaking only slightly. To see you, all of you. Man, wolf, beast. To remind you that strength and gentleness aren't opposites. To crash as many ceremonies as necessary, if you ever forget your worth. I squeezed his hands. And to love you recklessly, completely, without reservation, for the rest of my life. He kissed me before the officiant could finish the ceremony, and I kissed him back, not caring about protocol or propriety or what anyone thought. We'd spent too long caring about what we should do instead of what we wanted. Never again. When we finally broke apart, the small gathering applauded. Even Garrett, who'd had every right to be furious about the ruined wedding, was smiling. To the Alpha King and his queen, he called out, raising a glass. May their rule be long, and their arguments legendary. To Cyrus and Isla. The others echoed. We celebrated late into the night. But eventually, Cyrus caught my hand and pulled me away from the gathering, leading me through corridors I now knew as well as my old cabin's single room, to the library. Our library. It was dark except for the enchanted globes, which had dimmed to a soft glow. The painted night sky above seemed more real than ever, stars scattered like diamonds across endless black. I have something for you, Cyrus said, pulling a small book from his pocket. I took it, running my fingers over the leather cover. It was blank, no title, no author. Just potential waiting to be filled. I thought you could write your own story, he explained. Not the fairy tales you used to tell yourself in that cabin, but the real one, about a girl who saved a wolf and ended up saving a king. About 2 broken people who built something whole, I corrected softly. That too. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me. Thank you, Isla, for crashing my wedding. For loving me when I was convinced I was unlovable. For seeing past the curse to the person underneath. Thank you for giving me a library, I said against his chest. And for teaching me that being broken doesn't make me worthless. We stood there in the darkness, holding each other, 2 people who'd been taught they were insufficient and had proven the world wrong. Outside, in the courtyard, I could hear the celebration continuing. Music and laughter and joy. But in here, in our library, there was just us. Just quiet and possibility and the profound certainty that we'd found something rare and precious. Not a fairy tale ending where everything was perfect, but something better, something real. And as Cyrus shifted to wolf form and I climbed onto his back, ready for another run through moonlit forests, I thought about all the stories I'd told myself over the years, about princes and princesses and happily ever after. Those stories had been beautiful lies. But this was true. And truth, I'd learned, was worth more than all the fairy tales in the world.